Okay, we're back. We're our last segment of this conversation talking about the letter of the from Birmingham jail. It has been so rich in this discussion. You know, there's a part of it that is also a really key critical part of what Dr. King talks about in the letter. And he talks about the white moderate. He talks about that oftentimes he believes that even more so than the Klansmen or the races that who really was standing in progress.
They're real enemies to our progress.
Right. And so I want you to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that was one of his disappointments, and it's also with the church. Those two together, because it was the same kind of response. You know, he points out how they are more committed to law and order than to justice. And then goes on into this whole diatribe about time, because, you know, some clergymen had mentioned that eventually, you know, you will get your freedom. You know, everybody knows that over time this will happen.
Right.
And Dad is like, well, no, you know, because time is neutral.
That's right.
It can be used constructively or destructively. In some kind of way, he says that, unfortunately, the forces of evil have used time more effectively. You know, and I don't even want to go into that because I could go all off into the wrong direction when I think about, you know, Project 25 and how that all evolved.
Yes.
And how, as painful and unfortunate as it is, how from their vantage point it's been effective.
Right.
Because how they use the time.
How they use the time.
Effectively. And a lot of that has to do with strategy. A lot of that has to do with, you know, conquering what my father called the drum major instinct, which is, you know, a whole nother issue in movement building, that you got to get your ego in check, because we got to work, you know, in a synergistic sometimes fashion. We got to be mutually submissive, all that kind of stuff. But he went on to say something very important about the time factor, and that is, and I know you said it had you with the chill bumps. Time has to be helped. That's the first thing. You know, and he said, because if you don't work as a co-creator with God, because some kind of way we're thinking, you know, if we just get past this moment,
that's right,
it'll be all right. You know, I'm a strong woman of faith. You are too. Captain Alphen is a strong man of faith. And we believe in the power of God, and we know that God is on the side of justice and that he's moving in and through the universe. But we are co-creators. He made us as co-creators.
That's right.
To help to move things along. So there's a part we play in this.
Yes.
And so he said that if we don't play our part, you know, in moving, and I'm paraphrasing now, if we play our part in moving justice and freedom forward, then time becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation.
Right.
So we have to be involved. Now, I say to people all the time, my mother has a quote: struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. I say to people all the time, we are all called to the freedom struggle.
That's right.
As generationally. Now, an individual may choose to opt out, but the generation can't opt out.
Right.
And you may have to moment, and you should take those mental health breaks, those, you know, days where you need to just do a woo-saw, and that's necessary. But we can't sit back in the cut and just wait for time to pass.
That's right.
Especially now, because there's a lot of damaging, damning, and destructive stuff happening. So we have to be a part of participating in using time creatively and strategically now, so that the forces of social stagnation are not triumphant.
Absolutely. Amen. Captain Alphen.
Yes.
You know, as you're training on this and preparing people, part of what you said earlier was that through this process, it's transformative to the person themselves.
Absolutely.
Right? And so I'm just, as you approach this, you know, I really would like to share what you mean by that. How is it transformative to people?
Well, once you learn what it is, we're really just opening you up and taking you back to who you are as a human being. And so that behavior, acting violence, is out of character. So what we do is say, here's another way to solve it, and it makes you, there's a lot of officers say, I don't take my blood pressure pill anymore. It helps on your stress. It helps on relationship with your family and the people who you say you love. And then Dr. King called it in '57, it's militant. And when he was talking to the clergy in the letter from Birmingham, yeah, he loved the clergy, he loved the church, but nonviolence is tough love. I'm going to tell you the truth. And he said, look, a lot of the moderate whites walked down to Selma or came into Birmingham and picked up the blacks who had been beaten. They wanted improvement, not equity, and they walked away. So he was very, he's militant. In fact, he said militancy is demanding, persistent, and consistent. So nonviolence can be militant. It's not passive.
And I think that's the part that really that I want to shake the world to hear how really nonviolence resistance is not only is a strategy, but is also a strengthening tool. Like you got to go to a higher level. You got to go to a higher place to have that level of self-discipline. You got to go to it's even discipline and thought that you're at the point that you're not going to let somebody else make you devolve out of your space, your character, your integrity.
Right.
There's something really powerful about that. And so as we are kind of moving forward around this training, we know that this is a generational piece. I was at a meeting last weekend and it was talking about Project 2100. And I was like, Project 2100. And it was like, we're thinking about the year 2100. What's our vision for 2100? That sound like a movie that Arnold Schwarzenegger should be in. I was like, 2100, that's a long, but really y'all, it's only 75 years.
Right.
That means that my grandbaby that is here right now, is God willing, if God blesses him with a long life, he will be here.
Yes.
That's not that far away.
Right.
And so, as I think about that and I think about how relevant, why is that letter so relevant now? Why do we believe, or what are the parts in that, that we think that a young organizer, someone who is listening to this right now, who is frustrated, quite frankly, they might be mad as heck, right? They're frustrated, they're upset, they feel betrayed by what happened this last election cycle. They don't want to explode, right? Why is this a strategy? How is this helpful for them?
Well, we teach them how to manage their anger. Did Dr. King get angry? Absolutely. But we teach them how to not focus on the personality, focus on the conditions that produce the problem. And therefore, you change conditions, you change people. So therefore, we teach how you never manage anger, because managing anger can cause high blood pressure and health issues, all that's internal disease inside yourself. So you never want to manage. You want to focus it out and get on the conditions that that's causing that are causing the issues in our society. And therefore, it's like I say, it takes you back to who you are as a human being. I was very angry as an African American male in the United States because they tried to hang me. I say there are some white people. So I had to understand what to do with that anger. And in the service and the police department, racism. And so I was an African male angry in the United States of America. I didn't repeat with liberty and justice for all. I would just move my lips because I was mad. So her mother and Kingston and family, Mrs. Ferris, taught me how can you be successful in directing that anger in the right direction and not so it destroys you. That's why we're hating. You hate people, you don't destroy the person you hate, you destroy yourself.
And I think the fundamental question is, what's so powerful about nonviolence is it helps you to frame an outcome, a goal. And I always ask people, what is the outcome that you're hoping for?
Right.
That you're seeking for? Because that should determine, that's why Daddy says your means and ends have to be consistent. You can't have violent means to get to nonviolent ends. You can't have non-peaceful ways to get to peace. So the young person has to decide, do you want a certain outcome that's constructive or destructive? Because violence is a descending spiral. It just reproduces itself over and over and over again. And so this helps you to channel it so that you can get to the outcome you're talking about. Because in the end, as he said, you can knock up all the heads you want to do what you want. But I asked the question, now what? What has been accomplished? What is different? What has happened? And most times, feel good shouldn't be what you want. I feel better.
Right.
Well, then that's self-centered.
Right.
You're not for the cause. You're not down for the community. You're not trying to advance, stuff for humanity. This is really about you. And really, movement is not about us.
Right.
We may be impacted by this stuff directly or indirectly, but at the end of the day, what I'm impacted by directly, my father was doing this for me. his daughter, the next generations. When John Lewis and Jose Williams and my uncle was out there too, my father's brother, were on that bridge in Selma. Yeah, they were thinking about this, but my uncle was thinking about his 5 children.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And although John didn't have any children, he was thinking about other young people
That's
and
right.
generations to come. I'm doing this for them, so I'm going to discipline myself. And if I have to pay the price for another generation, look at it that way. Yeah, I'm pissed off at what's happening, but I want to make sure my pissed offness doesn't become so destructive that what I deliver to the next generation is going to damn them to further destructiveness.
And something you said too, I think both of you mentioned around, part of this is also to move away from individualism to collective. And so part of what happens, even when we're looking at movements, you have to think about, how are you leading a movement in a way that you can protect as much of the collective as possible. There are different folks
And that's the collective that's a part of it.
That's right.
And to be a part of it.
And to be a part of it.
Never forget there's a sideline. You know what I'm saying?
That's good.
There are folks on the sideline
Yeah.
waiting to join. But they're not going to join in something that's chaotic.
That's right.
That is not defined, doesn't have certain ground rules. They'll just sit there.
Right.
And so this is bigger than me, myself, I, and my folks. It's really about all of humanity. And even the folks who ain't here today.
Right.
Unborn generations.
And also, Dr. King, there's people on the sideline that want to take over your demonstration, your movement,
Exactly.
because they're provocateurs.
Yes,
And they're
those
professional provocateurs. So at every riot, they opportunists. They come in and it's they create a movement, a mass movement of people who are angry, and they direct them to do something stupid.
Well, that's why I think part of movement, what we know is first, the first rule of movement is first do no harm. I remember even with Black Voters Matter, we had an incident with seniors on a bus down in South Georgia a couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember, and we were taking them to vote, and there were people in position in that county that said that we could not take a bus full of black seniors down a block to vote. And so it's interesting because I know Cliff and I were livid. I know I was livid. I was ready to shut it down that day. I was like, I'm going to go over here and shut it down. And we were so upset, and we got on the bus, but I've been raised by older people. My grandparents raised me. And so I knew that at the end of the day, I was like, my mind has to not be on my anger. I got to think about the people who have entrusted that we're organizing in this moment. What's their need? And their need in this moment is to keep them calm, to allow them to have the process, not to take this moment. Because there was one woman that was in there that was mid-80s that really was a triggering impact for her, right? And so first do no harm in our community so that, now we went back. When we had our strategy together, when we had our plan, when the space, the very next day, we did go back with a specific demand, and to bring correction. But I'm saying that because I think I want to impress on folks. This is why this letter is so important to me, of how it has to be a disciplined movement. And in these moments, it has to be informed. We got to be prepared. It has to be disciplined, and it does have to be rooted in spirit. We have to see this. The last thing that I'll ask, and as we get ready to wrap up, is really around, he often talks about the through line in the letter is around the morality. That literally being people who knowing that unjust laws are immoral, and knowing that the moral position, those of us who have character and integrity, that the moral position is to challenge unjust laws. Exactly. So Dr. King, I don't know if you want to say something about that. I love it. I love his framing around it.
Yeah, for my father, the question always is first of all, you have to determine if an injustice exists. And if an injustice exists, am I willing to challenge the injustice or a law that may be in place? Like today, people got to make some serious decisions because it's a different set of rules around unjust laws. Right. There are laws being put in place now that little stuff that didn't amount to getting arrested now, or that amounted to getting arrested now, have become defined as you're a domestic terrorist. So strategy is real important in this. But just the more moral grounding to understand, how do I navigate through this landscape of unjust and just laws. And the three things when we do that, he emphasized you must do it openly, lovingly, and a willingness to accept the consequences. That takes a lot of discipline.
That's a lot of discipline.
Because you can lose your head.
That's right.
It might start off that you're calm, but you don't know what you're coming against. And the greater that force is that comes against you, you have to be even more grounded. That's why this whole self-purification, what we call personal commitment, is so critical to this process. But my mother talked about nonviolence just being a spiritual discipline, period. It engages your mind, your heart, and your soul. And it has to be grounded in the spiritual realm, knowing that there is a constant companion in God that is with us through this process. And so, this, yes.
So I want to share, did you want to share something,
Just
Captain?
to say that we have to make sure that Dr. King said, this is Dr. Martin Luther King and Mrs. King said, this is a spiritually active, and it's not religion active. It's
That's right.
spiritually active, and
Right.
therefore people can join in whatever religion or whatever you practice, but it's spiritual, not religion, and it's very inactive physically. So what we do has to be the spirit first,
It has
the
to be
spirit of you as a human being. That's the humanity of you up. That's why he read about personalism, and that's Dr. King when I say he. So anyway, I'll stop now, but we got so much to tell.
And we just should end this by saying this was a letter written from clergy persons to another clergy
That's
member.
right.
And I want people to always remember that my father always did things out of a certain spirit. He was always love-centered in his approach. Even the way he closed the letter in
It's
brotherhood,
beautiful.
he talked
Yes.
about one day being able to meet them, as
Yes.
brothers. But he challenged the church.
That's right.
Because for them to sit on the sideline and take these neutral positions instead of being like the one they profess, Jesus Christ, who was a disturber of the peace. And a lot of times we tend to, churches can come in alignment with the status quo.
Right.
And be silent at a time that it should be engaged.
That's right.
And so, the movement he led, I say, was a spiritual movement that impacted civil and human rights, as opposed to the civil rights movement.
Well, I think we can end on that note right there. That is a powerful frame. I often say that it won't be our politics to save us, it'll be our humanity. Exactly. And so in this space and this spirit, we just touched the surface, y'all.
Right.
Like, we know that letter is so rich, but it's so instructive. And we really going to go a little bit deeper with folks to really recognize that we've got tools. We've got tools to address the moment at hand, that there are things that we should be doing, we could be doing in this moment. But if you're trying to figure out what to do in this moment, if you're feeling some sense of anxiety, fear, or you just mad, right, and you're angry with what is happening right now, this is why we're offering this tool. There is a way that's righteous anger, right? I believe in righteous anger. Take righteous anger that has fueled us, that has been a part of our survival, that has been a part of our resistance, that has been a part of our advancement. And so what we want to do is we want to acknowledge that there's righteous anger in our communities, and how can we use that in such a way that is really constructive, in a way that we're not only just standing for freedom, we modeling it. And that in that process, which I love what you raised, Captain Alvin, that in that process, we are going to be transformed. That understanding that our actions are not just about transforming what's outside of us, but most importantly, it's about transforming what's inside of us. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. King.
Thank you,
I'm really excited about working with you, and thank you, Captain Alvin. I'm excited about learning from you. Black Voters Matter 365. All love and power.